Everybody knows the story of the ill-fated ship, the Titanic, but what many people don't know is that the tragic sinking of the largest ship ever built was simply a real-life reenactment of the very same tragedy, involving a nearly identical ship, as described in a fictional book that was written 14 years before the disastrous loss of the Titanic. Was this coincidence? Or was it something else? Perhaps a rare and powerful ability called precognition. Hello. This is Basil Nightingale, speaking for the Bill Russo channel. We bring you now the eerie details behind the loss of the Titanic, and the fictional story that foretold the horror of the world's greatest disaster at sea, more than 1 decade before the great ship was even dreamed of. And now, here's Jeffrey Baines to begin the tale.
The Titanic. The most famous as well as the largest and most luxurious cruise ship of its day sank on an April night in 1912. Just 4 days into her voyage from England to New York City.
The ship was cruising at almost top speed, on that frosty April night in the North Atlantic, almost 25 knots of speed, despite having received 6 messages from other ships, warning of drifting ice. The ice conditions were the worst for any April in the previous 50 years. Should we blame the captain for the ship striking an iceberg, and sinking in a little more than 2 hours? Perhaps not. Perhaps someone else, a writer of fiction, is to blame. More than 1,500 of the 2,200 people on board met a horrible death by drowning in the cold waters 400 miles distant from the Canadian province of Newfoundland and Labrador. When the Titanic went down, it was as if the ship were following a script that had been written 14 years prior, in 1898. That was the year in which Morgan Robertson wrote his book called Futility. The plot of his novel concerned the sinking of the world's largest cruise ship. And yes, in the fictional story the ship went down after hitting, wait for it. Yes. You guessed it. An iceberg. It was a ship for the rich and famous. A ship that was called unsinkable, just the way people described the Titanic. Robertson imagined his ship as being 800 feet long, just slightly less than the length of the Titanic, but almost an exact match. The Titanic was a bit longer, at 882 feet, almost the length of 3 American football fields. So that's the first similarity between the Titanic and the ship described in Robertson's book. Both ships were the longest ever built. Here's another fact. The tonnage of Robertson's fictional ship was 70,000 tons, as compared to the Titanic, which was nearly identical, coming in at 66,000 tons. But the similarities don't stop there. Both disasters happened on a chilly night in April. Both ships could carry more than 2,000 passengers but only had enough lifeboats to shuttle less than 1/3 of the passengers to nearby rescue ships, but in both cases there were no nearby ships. So once their handful of lifeboats were filled, there was no hope for the remaining 2/3 of the passengers. One more thing. In the tragic real-life tale of the world's largest ship, it was named the Titanic. You may be wondering what name was given to the fictional ship. No, it was not called the Titanic. It was close though. In perhaps the most amazing coincidence of the many similarities between the fictional story and the real-life story, the name of the fictional ship was the Titan. the Titan. The name was identical to the Titanic, except for the last two letters. The letter I and the letter C, which of course are the first two letters of the menace that sank both ships. I, C, E, ice. As in iceberg. There you have it. The wreck of the Titanic, as predicted 12 years before it happened, by a writer named Morgan Robertson. Was it coincidence, a remarkable concurrence of events or circumstances without apparent causal connection? Or was it precognition? The advanced knowledge of an event, especially as it refers to a paranormal experience. You decide. Coincidence or precognition? That's the end of this segment of the video, but stay tuned. We have a special series of 6 drawings, made just after the sinking of the Titanic. A 17-year-old youth who survived the disaster, described it to an artist just after the tragedy, while the horror was still agonizingly fresh in his mind. Here's Geoffrey Baines again to describe the amazing drawings showing the sinking of the ill-fated vessel.
Here's the first of the 6 sketches showing the heartbreaking 2-hour plunge to the ocean floor. At 1:45 midnight, disaster strikes. By 5 past midnight, Captain Smith knows the mighty ship is doomed. He issues the order: get the lifeboats. Women and children first. Just 90 minutes later, the ship is already halfway to eternity. Only 3 stacks remain above water. And only about 300 people are on lifeboats. And 1,700 more wait for one of the 300 seats remaining. Just 65 minutes after hitting the iceberg, the ship splits in half. The foresection slowly drifts away for a brief moment. Then it sinks. At 2 a.m., the end is near. The stern section pivots around. Eerily, it swings over the spot where the forward section sank. As the few lucky survivors watch from their lifeboats, the mighty ship stood vertical for 5 minutes before sinking, along with 1,500 passengers and the crew.
And so closes the sad tale of the Titanic, and of its eerie similarity to the ship described 14 years before the disaster. This has been a presentation of the Bill Russo channel. Written and produced by Bill Russo, the narration was provided by yours truly Basil Nightingale, along with Geoffrey Baines of the podcast, Short Story Theatre. Tune into Bill Russo's Short Story Theatre for dramatic tales of mystery and horror, as well as good old-fashioned yarns with a happy ending. The podcast is available on all podcast sites from Apple to Zodiac. Thanks for watching the video and join us again real soon. Won't you?
Hi folks. This is Matt LeBook speaking. Also on this channel, don't miss the video version of Bill Russo's highest-selling Western short story. It's titled I Grew Up in Dodge City in 1875. It's the story of young Chalky Jones, who walked 1,500 miles to Dodge City from Lone Pine, California, after both his parents died. He becomes the deputy to Sam Bassett, the real-life, first sheriff of Dodge City. This story, which has been viewed thousands of times on YouTube, is an experimental video, and was one of the first dramas to be produced on YouTube using computer voices. They sound a little bit human and a bit like a computer, but that doesn't stop the story from being a fast-paced Western. Tune in today on Bill Russo's Short Story Theater. Available on all podcast sites.